My name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm the co-host of a podcast called Supergirl Radio, and we do not only an audio podcast, but we also do a video live stream, so we can talk about that kind of stuff as well. I've been doing it. I guess I could introduce myself a little bit. So I've actually been podcasting since about 2009. I started with a podcast about Lost with my friends, and then V came on after Lost ended, and then Once Upon a Time came on after V ended. So I did some ABC shows there for a little bit. And then in 2015, I started podcasting about the CW Supergirl because I'm a big DC fan, and that was about a year before the show premiered, so we just talked about Supergirl comics and Smallville and the Helen Slater movie. So we talked about Supergirl before the show even aired, and that was a good way to start learning about the character when the show got there, so we knew about what we were talking about. So you can find that at supergirlradio.com if you want to check it out. So that's been my most consistent podcast. I quit my Once Upon a Time podcast because I didn't like the direction the show was going and I wasn't having a good time with it anymore. But the CW Supergirl, I have such a fun time talking about, not necessarily always because the show is so good, but because my friend Morgan does it with me and we have such a good time talking about it. So we do both live streams and audio podcasts. I will stream to the DCTV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcast. I haven't been having a lot of fun doing that. I also have a personal YouTube channel that I've been doing some live streaming on, and youtube.com/DuckMilk Prod, where I talk about, I talk a lot about Zack Snyder films. I'm doing some live streams about Batman v Superman's critical reception. So I'm actually going through and reading 38 reviews by the Rotten Tomato top critics about Batman v Superman, and you would be surprised at how enlightening it is to know what they actually wrote about the film. So that's been fun, been doing that mostly every Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. So I have a question. So are you interested in podcasting? Do you have a podcast?
Yeah, I've been running a mythology podcast for the last 5 years or so.
Awesome, what's it called?
Myths Your Teacher Hated.
Very cool. And so what kinds of things do you talk about? Do you talk about one specific genre, or do you kind of just talk about all things mythology?
Mostly telling the stories, but with the unsanitized version. So, all of the blood and violence and stuff that usually gets left out of the modern adaptations.
Oh, very cool. And actually, since you're a podcaster as well, I'm going to give you a microphone, and we can have a little conversation if you want to come grab this.
I also can just project.
You don't have to just listen to me talk. You can probably teach me something. So that's very cool. So do you do that on a weekly basis? How often do you podcast?
Bi-weekly. I typically do spend a week scripting, usually about 2 weeks ahead of the script when I'm going to be recording, and then I spend a week editing the audio.
Gotcha. And do you do it by yourself, or do you do it with a co-host?
Completely solo.
Yeah, that's a very different experience. I don't think people realize it. I like having a co-host because I like to bounce ideas off of someone else and get to have a discussion about something. And the times when I've had to do it by myself, it is a different experience because you almost have to script it because you don't want to you don't want to sound unprepared. You want to sound like you know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I'm impressed that you can do that solo. So I just have a little presentation here about podcasting for people who don't or haven't started a podcast. So maybe it would be more beneficial to talk it since I'm talking to another podcaster. I'll try to edit it as I go to talk about things that we're already doing as podcasters. So how long have you been in podcasting?
5 years.
Okay.
Coming this September.
Okay, very cool. All right, so I guess I could ask you some questions that I want to talk about because I'm curious because I do this. Have you listened to other podcasts who are in the same wheelhouse as you to get ideas or to figure out a way you can differentiate yourself?
Before I started podcasting, I did listen to some other mythology podcasts, but once I started, I kind of stopped because that way I can have plausible deniability that there's nothing that I'm taking from anybody else. If there's a story that I found, it's not coming from anybody else. So it prevents any possibility of plagiarism.
Yes, so you don't feel like you're just regurgitating what they're doing. I agree. I think that's a good way to go about it. My experience, because there are a couple of other Supergirl podcasts out there, and what I find is I try not to listen. I support them, but I try not to listen to them because of that kind of thing, where I don't want to have a discussion about the show and bring up points they've already talked about on their show, for example. So I try to only listen to them maybe after the season's over or something like that. But I do that same kind of thing where I don't want to like get other ideas into my head. I want my ideas to be fresh and of my perspective and not somebody else's own. But what I do think is beneficial, and I'm curious to see if you do this as well, is that I'm not only a podcaster, I'm a big fan of podcasting. So I've been into, my first real podcast was a podcast called The Lost Podcast with Jay and Jack. And they were pretty, kind of cutting edge. They would have people call in and leave voicemails and provide feedback, and they would talk about theories. And I just loved the way they handled everything, because they didn't talk down to anybody. They sort of, were very good about taking people's theories and saying, okay, well, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that. And they would let everybody have a voice be heard. And that's one of the things that I have adopted into my personal style of podcasting, is that I don't want to get on there and say, well, that's a stupid idea. I don't agree with that at all. I'll entertain the idea and see what people think, and then I'll say if I agree or disagree, and it's very civil. And so that was one of the things that the Lost Podcast with Jay and Jack taught me, and I've also tried to implement some of the same ways they handle feedback, so people can leave us voicemails, they can send us emails, they can tweet us. Now that we've been doing a lot of video live streaming, they can come and join our live chat, and that's been really, really fun. So I'll talk a little bit more about live streaming as we go, because that's been, we've been doing that for about a year and a half, and it's just completely revitalized what we do for Supergirl Radio. But I also love, there's a podcast called the No Agenda Podcast. And the way that they handle podcasting is that there's two guys, so there's co-hosts, and they talk about like news and political things and cultural things, but they also have their listeners they refer to as producers. So it's a really neat concept. So the producers can create jingles for them, or little funny sound bites. They can go out and get clips for them to play. And so it's a really good interaction back and forth between the hosts who do the podcast and the people who listen, because it feels like it's everybody's podcast. And so that's one of the big things that I also take away for my podcast, Supergirl Radio, where I invite listeners to say, hey, would you like to record our plugs for us? Tell people like where they can find us, because it gets a little monotonous to say, well, you can find us at supergirlradio.com, you can email us at supergirlradio@gmail.com. That gets a little monotonous if you hear the same person doing it every week. So we, do little giveaways, or like things where we provide a prize if somebody, wants to contribute. And it's been pretty successful. We've gotten a lot of really cool, creative things that way. And so the No Agenda podcast has been really influential and inspirational for me. So my goal for the podcast has always been trying, for my podcast, and I'll ask you about yours, but mine was to provide a space for Supergirl fans that would be more like a community, would feel like a positive experience, even if you don't like the show, and sometimes I don't, but to have a place where people can share their thoughts in a civil way. And so that's one of been my things, is I really like having built a community. We see a lot of the same people in the live chat. We get a lot of the same people emailing us, and it's great to build that bond with other fans. So that was one of my goals that I think we've achieved really well. So my question to you is, what are the goals that you hope? Did you sit down and think about goals before you started your podcast?
I mean, a little. It was a little bit impulsive, but it started because I was listening to a number of different mythology podcasts, because it's a huge interest of mine, and I kept noticing that they were dancing around a lot of the stories, and those old stories are brutal.
Yeah.
They are super brutal, and people were avoiding a lot of the original versions, or avoiding talking about some of the origins of these characters, because it just wasn't PG friendly.
Right.
And so I wanted to create something that was a little different, that didn't shy away from that, PG-13 hard R sometimes.
Well, that's a really cool way to set yourself apart from some of those other podcasts, but also provide an educational atmosphere. So if I listened to your podcast, I would probably learn a lot about mythology that I wouldn't hear somewhere else. So I think that's a really a great niche for you to be able to provide a way to talk about that kind of thing that nobody else is talking about. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And so I was going to talk about co-hosts, so if anybody listens to this later or watches this video later, I guess the one thing I would talk to tell people if they wanted to have a co-host is you have to be upfront with a person about your expectations. Sometimes with podcasts, you probably know, podcasts can be a lot of work. You got to do your homework. You got to know what you're talking about. I'm big on preparation, which you will find out. I'm a little nerdy about it. But I'm big on preparation. There's a lot of time commitments that you have to. I mean, you talked about the editing and the recording. That doesn't just happen. You have to work at that. And then there are, if you do podcasting certain ways, there are financial costs that come with it. So my recommendation for anybody who wants to do a podcast with someone else, just be upfront. This is how much it costs. This is the time commitment. This is what I expect of you. Because I think once the other person knows what they're getting into, they can either say, oh yeah, that sounds fine. That sounds like a lot of fun. Or they can say, that's too much for me. And that way you'll know that maybe if they are not into it, you don't need to waste your time trying to get them to do it. So I find that to be very baseline information that people need to know about co-hosts. And so preparation. So I guess my question to you about how you prepare for your mythology podcast, what do you have to do before you even sit down in front of a microphone?
I've got 20 mythology, folklore books that I'll flip through to find something that strikes my interest, something that I haven't done before, usually trying to find, I've spent the last couple of weeks over in Europe, let me go over and do something from South America. So I'll look for something, and then once I get that idea, I'll spend a lot of time researching, trying to find alternate versions, alternate translations, and try to really get a sense for the origins, the history, the whole breadth of that particular story.
That's awesome. So are you finding that some things you can pick certain things from other places and kind of tie things together in like thematic ways, or do you just like pick one thing to talk about?
I typically go, each episode is one story,
okay.
But it will be like, say, take Cinderella, which I was talking about this morning. There are 100 versions of it. There are, every culture has its own version, and so there's a lot to talk about. There's a bunch of different variations that I want to discuss all of them.
I would love to listen to your take on Cinderella, because it's what I understand about like the Japanese version is, you talk about brutal. Don't they like cut off their toes so they can squeeze their feet into the shoes?
They do that in the Japanese. They also do that in the Grimm brothers version. One cuts off her toes, one cuts off her heel. In the Tang Dynasty version, the wicked stepmother and the stepdaughter are killed in a cave-in at the end.
Whoa, that's pretty cool. I think that's actually a really vital podcast to put out there, because there are some things, I know a little bit about fairy tales, because I did that Once Upon a Time podcast, and I'm a big, fairy tale fan. But that's stuff that I think would be really beneficial to people to understand how storytelling changes based on culture and things like that. Very, very cool. Well, one of the things that I do, I'm big on Google Docs. I don't know how you prepare your stuff.
Google Docs.
Yes. I once heard somebody recommend Microsoft Word, and I was like, no. Do not do that, especially if you were to live stream or do a podcast with someone else. Google Docs, what I like about Google Docs is that you can edit them in real time, you can share them with other people, and I actually love it because, and this may be beneficial to you as well with mythology, is that I've been able to, over the last 6 years, been able to build a searchable archive. So because I have so many Google Docs for each episode that we do, if I need to go back and figure out what we talked about in 2016, I can find it by just searching a keyword, and it pops right up. And so I'm able to, like, if somebody says, what episode did you do this? I'm like, well, give me a few minutes, I'll look for it. And so that is really, for me, very beneficial. You can't really do that with Microsoft Word. You would have so many Word docs, and I don't even want to think about that. But Google Docs really saved me a lot of time. I can even copy and paste my Google Docs, so I don't have to type everything back out. I can just file, save as, and create a new one based off my last episode, so that I always maintain my same format. So man, Google Docs, that's like one of my biggest tips. Use Google Docs if you're a podcaster. Even for you, doing it by yourself, I imagine that would be helpful just based on the searchable archive. So I don't know if you've had any of that kind of experience. What do you like about Google Docs?
I mean, the searchable archive, for me, it's mostly being able to pull it up on multiple machines, because I do my recording on my desktop, but I do my typing on my Chromebook. but I'll sometimes edit on my MacBook. And so being able to pull that up on all these different machines without having to transfer it and worry about different formats. The Mac speaks to the Chromebook, speaks to the Windows machine, and so Google Docs is available everywhere.
Yeah, and if you have to make a change to that, you don't have to file, save, and then send it back to yourself on all those machines. You just make the edit in Google Docs, and it edits it in real time on all those machines. Oh man, that's a great way to use Google Docs actually. So for my examples, I'm big on format because I think it helps kind of make everything flow. You can kind of be loosey-goosey in some aspects, but my memory has gotten so bad as I've gotten older that if I did not use a format, I would not know what to say when I got in front of the microphone. So even for me doing this presentation with you, I had to make a presentation so I wouldn't not know what to say. So for me, I like to use the same intro and outro every time. Even our format for our feedback is very similar. How we introduce the episodes when we have episode discussions, we always read the official description so people who, even if they haven't seen the episode, they can kind of know what it's about when we talk about it. So that's big for me is preparation. Anytime somebody asks me like, what do you write? What's your biggest thing that you would say to people if you were going to give them advice as a podcaster? Preparation is always my biggest thing because anybody can sit in front of a microphone and talk about something. But the podcasts that I think are the best to listen to are the ones when you can tell they've done their work behind the scenes. Because I've listened to podcasts where they didn't, and you can tell. You can tell. So another thing that I think is really important is consistency. Figure out what your publishing schedule is going to be and to stick to it. For me, with Supergirl Radio, our big time slot is it's kind of gone back and forth with Superman and Lois this season, which has been a little frustrating. But we normally, for years and years and years, we've been recording or live streaming at Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. And so everybody knows every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, there's probably going to be a Supergirl Radio episode. And listeners, I have found, will come to expect that. If there's not an episode, they will be like, TikTok, where's that episode? So people do catch on to when things happen. And so I think the more consistent that you are with something as a podcaster, the better it is. And that's the better way to create engagement with people who listen. So my suggestion for people who want to start a podcast is figure out a date and a time in your week, each week, that you're going to commit to an hour, 2 hours to record your episode, and just keep that consistent each time. What's been really helpful with my friend Morgan, who does Supergirl Radio with me, she's put that in her calendar, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. We both agreed that, that's when we're going to do it, and sometimes we have to, shift it a little bit. Maybe we have to do it on Wednesday if we have something going on. But for the most part, we try to keep to that time, and it's been really good for both of us. And also publishing each episode at a consistent time is also really important because I know people who, I usually try to post the episode to our feed Thursdays around 8 a.m. And people, if it's not there Thursday morning, they'll be like, oh, where's the episode? Did y'all do an episode this week? So consistency is very key. So I'm curious, how do you keep a consistent time in your week to set aside for your podcast?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I do my scripting and my editing at the same time. When I get home from work, the first thing I do is sit down, spend about an hour working on the episode, whether it's scripting or editing. Recording sessions are, like Saturday mornings are either recording sessions or it's dropping the episode. And so they have the same, like you said, it's always dropping the same time on the same day and keeping that consistent schedule to keep a rhythm.
That's awesome. You sound like a pro, and I'm going to have to download your podcast so that I can expect it each week. So for me, and this is something we can talk about, maybe you can teach me something about the stuff that you use, because it sounds like your setup's a little different for me. I'm pretty simple. A lot of people, one of the first things they talk about when they try to get into podcasting is, well, what kind of equipment do I need? And now some people go the extra mile, and they will get like the soundboard and all that kind of stuff. For me, I've always, for what I do with Supergirl Radio, I'm basically having a conversation over, a YouTube live stream with a friend of mine, and it really, for us, it doesn't take much. I use a Yeti, a Blue Yeti, which is just a USB microphone that plugs into my Mac, and my co-host uses a headset microphone, and that she prefers that because you can kind of keep it out of your way. You don't have to worry about it. It's just on your head. So we have different microphones that we use, but because we have invested a little bit, more money into those things, it actually sounds pretty good. So I always tell people, like, especially if you're starting, don't worry about the big soundboard. You can buy some really good microphones for not a lot of money, and those are going to last you a long time. My Yeti, I recently bought a new Yeti, but the one I had before that I used for like 9 years. So they last a long time. They're pretty low maintenance. They have good sound quality. So I personally like the Yetis. The Snowball is cheaper, but sometimes it's not as good. You kind of have to like figure out another way to put it on a stand and stuff. But yeah. So for people just starting out, I would recommend kind of starting with low maintenance equipment. Now maybe in the future you can invest in the big studio equipment. But I always just tell people, get you a pretty decent mic, get you maybe a microphone stand or a desk attachment so that you can feel comfortable when you're talking in front of the microphone, because you don't want to be uncomfortable in front of it because you're not going to do it. A pop filter I think is really important, just to kind of take those hard B's and P's out. And then headsets or earbuds are really important, just to prevent echoes. I know a lot of people now are recommending like the Bluetooth earbuds for like live streaming, and it's very rare that I find that those are successful. Because people like fidget with them, or they stop working and it doesn't sound good. So I would personally not recommend like the Bluetooth earbuds. I would just go with the good old standbys with the headsets, or like the earbuds that you plug into stuff. Those are good standbys. So I'm curious, what's your setup like? How do you record?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I started with the Snowball and ended up upgrading to the ATR 100 just because it gave me a little better breath control, being able to keep out the susurrance. And I'm a little bit misophonic, so I like hearing mouth noise really bothers me, so I'm really controlling about moving that, and this makes it a little easier to do that.
Awesome.
But yeah, I've got the microphone. I made a little cheap sound booth with some poster board and some like $10 worth of acoustic foam and a pop filter and the headset. Like basically the same thing you're talking about, just a good mic and then like a little bit of sound dampening in the room. That's really all you need.
Yeah, it always makes me kind of laugh, and I don't mean this to sound condescending, but I hear some like beginner podcasts. They're like, well, I'm gonna rent out a studio. I'm gonna get in there, and I know people make money by like providing studio space and teaching people how to podcast. I'm like, you don't need all that. You're wasting your money doing that. You just need a good mic and a few little pieces like accessories, and you're gonna be good. You can even that's great that you have like sound dampening in your room. I also know that carpet can be beneficial to help you with some of that sound dampening. I tried one time to podcast on my hardwood floor, and it just was not good. So I also recommend maybe podcasting in a space that has carpet. That will help you out. And in a smaller room sometimes, I used to podcast out of my walk-in closet, and that was helpful because it kind of shut out some of that sound. So yeah, sound dampening is very beneficial, and that will help aid your sound quality. So that's awesome. I have had a big journey in how I actually record Supergirl Radio. So when I first started, and back in 2009, I didn't really know what I was doing. There were some recorder like apps that you could get on your phone where you could record phone conversations. So I tried that a couple of times. It was really not dependable. I could not depend on actually getting that recording every time, and I did not like that. And then I had a revelation one time that like, oh, well, I could hop on a conversation on a Skype call with somebody, and I could record it that way. So there's ways to record through Skype. If you're talking to somebody else, you can. There's something called Call Recorder for Mac. There's also a Pamela piece of software that goes with the PC side of Skype. Call Recorder worked for me really well when I would record through Skype. You could extract both sides of the call as individual tracks, which was really nice. They also had a really nice way to do video calls. So if you're going to go that route, Skype and Call Recorder are pretty excellent. I've also experimented with audio recorders, like the Zoom recorders are very good and dependable. You can plug a microphone. Sometimes if you get the big Zoom audio recorders, you can put like XLR cables in there or little lavalier mics. That's pretty good. So I find that the Zoom recorders, you can use them for a lot of different things. You can do, like if you're doing man on the street interviews, you can use them for that, or you can just use them to record yourself if you're doing a podcast. You can also record locally with Audacity or GarageBand, which are kind of helpful if you're just going to record your side of things. So I'm curious, how do you use, what's your recording process? What kind of software do you use, and what do you think works best?
I mean, for me, yeah, since I'm solo, Audacity is the way to go for me. It's nice, it's free, it's got some basic effects to clear out the room tone and to give me a little control when I need it, but it's not too many bells and whistles. I've done a few of like the Skype recording when I've just done stuff on guesting on other podcasts or doing some stuff just for funsies that's not being dropped anywhere, it's just for friends.
Right.
But yeah, Audacity for solo is really a nice, solid program.
Yeah, it has actually a good amount of effects to clean up like noise, some extra noise that you might have in there. They have a way to bring things together if you have a pregnant pause or something. So there's a lot of benefits to Audacity, and like you said, it's free. So that a lot of these tools you can get for free, and you don't have to pay anything for them. So it's really, really helpful. GarageBand, I used to like GarageBand before I got my new laptop. I don't know if they updated the software or something, but now it's weird. I don't know how to use it now. It's not as user-friendly as it used to be, but I used to really like GarageBand for the Mac. But my suggestion for people is just find what works for you. There are different ways to do it. Figure out, kind of play around in different things and figure out what works best for you in terms of being able to use the equipment or the software. And because if you have a hard time with it, you're not going to keep doing it. So if I find that it's easy for me, I'm able to do it. So one of the things that I recommend to people, especially for live streaming, they don't pay me to say this, but I shill for them all the time. It's a web-based program called StreamYard. You can go to StreamYard.com. You've heard of StreamYard? I love StreamYard so much. It has changed Supergirl Radio immensely. We are able to do video live streams, and the thing I like about it is it's user-friendly. You can hop on there, figure out how to use it in like 5 minutes. I had a friend who tried to teach me how to use OBS one time. I was like, I cannot do this. This is too complicated for me. I have a degree in television production, and I could not use OBS. So StreamYard is really easy. A lot of it's just like clicking and unclicking, and so I really, really like the way StreamYard is set up, and they're constantly improving it. They take user suggestions and recommendations, and that's how they improve on the software. And so I really, really like that. It also has the ability, like Skype, you can download, if you have 2 people on the stream, you can download their separate audio tracks, so you have individual tracks. Sometimes that's helpful for me because I sniffle a lot. It's not necessarily because I'm sick, it's because of chemo side effects. I think when I was going through breast cancer, the chemo took out some of my nose hair, so I sniffle a lot. So sometimes it's nice if you cough or you sniffle, and you can take that kind of stuff out on your end. StreamYard also has really good sound quality. The stuff I was doing on Skype didn't sound as good as the stuff I was doing on StreamYard, so I like the sound quality there. And there's a free option, so if you don't want to pay for all the bells and whistles, you can do it for free. So there's a great StreamYard just has so many wonderful customizable things. I love being able to multi-stream. So for a lot of what we do streaming to DCTV Podcast, the YouTube channel, but we also stream to our Supergirl Radio Facebook page. Through my job, I've actually streamed to 5 different locations at once. So dependable, never had a problem. So that's really, really beneficial. You can even stream to LinkedIn. I don't know who streams to LinkedIn, but you can do it if you want to. It has a Twitch option. StreamYard also has what I like is it has the ability to customize your colors, your backgrounds, your banners. You can even do a little ticker on the bottom of the screen to let people know something. And what I use a lot, maybe too much, is I like to create overlays and video clips. I find that that's a little, for me, I'm a very visual person, so it's hard sometimes to watch a live stream and it's just 2 people talking. Sometimes that's, unless they're having a great conversation, it can maybe be a little boring for the audience. So I like to create overlays so it gives you something to look at. Video clips are nice when you have them so that people can actually see something else besides, just me talking. So I find that that takes a little more preparation, a little more work. You have to go in there and create those things. But I think it's worth it in the end to do it. You can also, what I think is great about StreamYard is that it has a real-time video description editing feature. So if you write a little description for your video, you can go into your broadcast, change it, and it automatically updates on Facebook and YouTube. You don't have to like go to the different platforms and edit them. You just do it once and it updates for both of them. It also has a record-only option, so if you don't want to go live anywhere and you just want to record a conversation, you can do that too. So I've used that quite a bit. So man, StreamYard. I love StreamYard so much. I can't. One day they're going to pay me for how much I promote them, but that day has not happened yet. I do some editing with the live shows. I don't do as much editing as I used to, but it used to take me like, because I would be really anal retentive about it. I used to take out all my sniffles, all my coughs, all the pauses, and that would take me about 4 hours for about a 2-hour episode. It can take a lot of time. With the live option, I guess it's a mental thing. I'm like, well, it's live. You know, those things are going to happen, so just keep it in there. So I've tricked myself into less editing time. So that's the benefit of the live streaming for me, is it's cut down. I edit a little bit to kind of clean up a few things, but I don't take as much time doing that anymore. So I'm curious, for your mythology podcast, what's your editing process like? What kind of software do you use? How long does it take you to do? What's it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. I'm very anal about getting out all of the breaths, all of the pops, all of the mouth noise to really get it as clean as possible, because that's stuff that when I'm listening to someone else's show, that's stuff that stands out to me that really bothers me. So I figure if it bothers me, it probably bothers other people. So I spend 4.5 hours probably editing for a 45-minute episode typically.
Yeah, I found that usually the editing time for me would double what the recording was. So if I had like a 1-hour record, it might be like 2-3 hours. If I had a 2-hour recording time, it might be 4 hours in editing time. So it would take me twice as long to edit as it would to record. So yeah, I think that's actually beneficial, especially for you as a solo host. I think that does matter in the end. If you listen to podcasts, that does make a difference for your sound quality and being able to listen to it. So I appreciate that you take the time to actually go that extra mile and make that really a good experience for people who are listening. Some software that I might recommend for people if they do want to do a lot of editing, either if it's video live streaming or audio editing. We've talked about Audacity. It's a pretty good editor. GarageBand, like we talked about. It's not as good as it used to be, but you can still use it if you need to. I am a video editor by trade, so I use Adobe Premiere Pro for both video and audio editing. And so that's just what I know, and that's just what I'm pretty decent at. So that's just what I use. But some people use, other programs for audio. They might, if they're really professional, they might use Pro Tools or something like that. But for people just, doing a podcast out of their bedroom or their office or something, you can use something as easy as Audacity and it works great. One of my tricks that I might recommend for people with editing is, I don't know how much you do in terms of audio leveling. I find that to be beneficial, especially for people who are like listening to a podcast in a car. And what I mean by audio leveling is that if I'm talking to, you may not need to do this because you're a solo host, but for me talking to my friend Morgan, it's good so that like I'm not louder than she is or she's not louder than me. It sort of levels out the audio. So there's a free software program that I use called the Levelator, and I'll run that through the Levelator, and it kind of evens everything out. And that's helpful, I think, before you really put it out into the world. So I would recommend that for people who are talking to more than one person. So I guess the next thing we can talk about, I'm going to check the time. Okay, so we're good on time. All right, so another thing I want to talk about is publishing the episode. So you've gone through the process of figuring out what you're going to talk about, then you talk about it on the recording, and then you go through the editing process, and you get it like you like it. Then you need to put it out into the world to your podcast feed. So I'm curious about what you use. I like to use Libsyn. It's depending on what you want in terms of space, is how the payment function goes and how much you have to pay for it. But I've been using Libsyn for, I guess I've been using it since 2011, 2012, something like that. I think it's pretty user friendly. It's not very complicated to learn how to use. It allows me to add new destinations. If a new thing comes up, you can easily add a destination. I'm going out to Google Podcasts and Podchaser and Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio and Spotify and Radio Public and Stitcher and all these places, and I just do it once, and it Libsyn automatically sends it out to all those places, so I don't have to do all that. So that makes it easy for me. I'm a little bit lazy on the publishing end, so I like it that it does it for me. I like being able to see stats. I try not to check the stats too much, but I do like to see like what's a more popular episode, a more popular topic that people like, and where people are listening. I like the ability to see that. It's nice to see like the global audience that we have. And I like the ability to schedule them. So you can schedule it ahead of time, and you can tell it I want it to go out on Thursdays at 8 a.m. Does it automatically, I don't have to think about it. So I like Libsyn, but I know there are other ways to do it that other people use. So I'm curious if for your mythology podcast, how do you get your episode out to your feed?
I am likewise on Libsyn.
Nice.
I'm just as lazy. I love that it has the single destination and it pushes it to all the pod chasers. So I mean, I'll post it on the social media, but as far as RSS feeds, all Libsyn, it's just so much easier.
So you mentioned the social media aspect of it. I know there is a way to publish things to Twitter. So there is a social media option there. Is that how you use that?
I haven't used that yet. I just haven't spent the time to learn how to use it. I usually craft I have a template that I use for the episodes, and so I'll use that and just publish it with whatever the artwork is for that particular episode.
Gotcha. Yeah, you do have the ability to upload artwork for, if you want to change it out. I usually kind of just use we have seasons of the podcast, so I'll usually change the artwork based on the seasons. But you can customize it to the episode if you like. Yeah, Libsyn, I think they really do a good job of being about how podcasters, the needs of podcasters, and they're constantly improving it for people who actually do this kind of thing. So I like that. They actually have a podcast called The Feed. I'm behind on it, but it's sometimes nice to listen to that podcast to find out what's the new thing that's coming out. What's the new feature that I need to jump on? What is Apple Podcast doing that's affecting Libsyn? So it's nice to hear the Libsyn perspective of how they do podcasting. So I usually recommend Libsyn to people just because they've made it so easy. So it costs a little bit per month, but I think it's absolutely worth it. So I think you mentioned your descriptions and the show descriptions that you have inside of Libsyn. This I think is really interesting because some people do these things a little differently in terms of like your show notes is what I call them. People may refer to them as something else. But I like to put a description of kind of what you're going to be listening to when you click on this episode. And then I'm big on trying to include sources and references. You may have something similar with your podcast because I like to try to educate people about Supergirl, where you can find this comic book issue, or if we talk about an episode of something that refers to this character, I like to link that stuff in there just so people have a way to further their knowledge about things if they want to check it out. Now, the biggest difference that I'm trying to work on in terms of like show notes or website posting, because we do post to supergirlradio.com, so that you go to that website and you can see all of our past episodes, and you can kind of listen to it that way on the website. But I'm having to learn more about web accessibility these days because there is a big push to make it more accessible for screen readers and things like that. So I'm having to learn the best way to do that, because there are some tricks about what to do and what not to do. So I'm trying to revitalize how I do links and bullet points and things like that. So that's something new that I'm working on. But what I would recommend to people about linking to their website is I've seen podcasters make the mistake. Well, I think it's a mistake. When they will post to Twitter or Facebook or something like that, they will share a link of their Apple Podcast link to their podcast, but it doesn't go directly to their episode. And I personally think that's a mistake, because I don't want to go to your Apple Podcast page and then have to find what episode it is. So I would just recommend to people, find that specific URL to that episode you want to share and use that in your social media post, because that way somebody can click on it once, they can go right to it. So I have seen people do that, and I'm like, it's maybe not the best way to share your episode. So I'm curious with your mythology podcast, what do you do once you publish it and you want to share it with the world? How do you put it out there?
Yeah, I mean, given that I'm autistic myself, I'm big on web accessibility. I know a lot of people who use screen readers, so it's a big thing. So, like on the website where I host everything, I have a list of all the show notes which have the scripts that I've written. So everything that I say, you can go back and you can read it. So if anything is unclear or if you missed something, you can go back and see exactly what was said. All of the links are in there. All of the descriptions are in there. And then, yeah, exactly like you said, I link back to your own website, link to where you've posted the episode. Don't make people go dig through some other place. Apple Podcasts can be difficult anyway. Don't make them do that.
Yeah, I try to make it as easy for people to listen to my episode as possible, because I found that frustrating as somebody who's a listener. Like, just tell me where to go. So that's really important. And that's good. So if you have any accessibility tricks, let me know. But yeah, so the direct URL, though, I would definitely recommend. And WordPress has been effective for me. I've been using WordPress for many, many years now. But I know there's other ways other than WordPress to create a website. So for me, social media promotion is a big deal. That's one of my parts of releasing my episode and putting it out for public consumption. One of the things, I've made a new best friend over the last year and a half, and its name is Canva.com. So it's one thing, I found Canva because I wanted to improve my YouTube thumbnails. And I'm not a graphic designer, I'm terrible with graphics, but Canva.com makes it so easy for me because it has a way to sync up things based on guidelines. It gives you royalty-free graphics you can use that you can put in there. It helps with colors. It will pick out colors of the image you have and match the color based on the image. You can upload fonts and logos and things, and it has templates for everything. It has templates for Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all sorts of flyers and posters and things like that. And so it makes it so much easier because you don't have to guess what the specification is, the dimensions of the image. You can just do a search for YouTube thumbnail. It'll give you the exact specs you need for a YouTube thumbnail. So that is really nice for me. I like having those templates. I love being able to put my branding on everything and being able to, I can create things in Canva.com so much quicker than I can even attempt to do it in Photoshop. Now, some people are better at Photoshop than me. I would imagine most people are better at Photoshop than me. But Canva it just makes everything so much easier for me because I'm so bad at it. So if you're not a graphic designer by trade, I would recommend Canva. And I can create templates that I can go back to and just, kind of use the same template every time. And it just makes it, quicker for me. So what I try to do is I try to create custom graphics for each of our episodes, especially if we're doing a live stream, so we can promote the live stream ahead of time and let people know when it's happening. So that's really important to me in creating graphics. I also, for social media, a lot of times I will repurpose audio and video clips of the podcast. So one of the ways that I found it's easy to do that, so a lot of people will have the audio clips that they'll post to their social media where it has the captions underneath it and the waveforms and all that. I would recommend a website called Wave, W-A-V-V-E, wave.co. You have to pay a little bit of a fee each month to use it, but it's really easy to use and it's a good way to get audio clips out there. And I think that's been really beneficial for us because if people can see or hear your podcast, you kind of get a sense of what your show is and your personality and things like that. So I recommend it. It's helped build our, we have a sizable Twitter account, but our Instagram has grown, I think, because of that content that we've been posting. I like to do a lot of video clips just because we've been doing more video live streaming. And so, of course, if you have over a minute-long clip, which usually sometimes I do, I'll have to use IGTV. And I found out very quickly that using the Instagram story specification dimension was the best to use for ITV because that would be a way to create cover images for those videos. So I would recommend doing that if you're using IGTV. And so these are examples of some of it's kind of hard to see maybe, of some of the social media graphics that I will use to help promote our episodes. It's really good to, of course, put your branding, your artwork on there so people know it's your show. Definitely put, basic information on there so people will know when and where to check things out. So I usually put the date, the time, where they can stream it. And I also, I kind of follow the TV commercial idea behind different graphics. I usually create a dated version, so I'll put like if it's, June 22nd, 2021, I'll create a version like that, and I'll use that same graphic and then put tomorrow on there, and I'll replace that one and put one that says today. So it's kind of the same thing, so they'll recognize it each time, but then have different versions so that they'll see like, oh, this is coming up, I need to check that out. So, so that's what they do in TV. They'll have dated versions and a thing that kind of lets you know, oh, this is coming up. So I've kind of utilized that for these graphics. I usually like to put that, it's going to be live if it's going to be live, so people can know that they can come jump on in the live chat, and I just base it off, image-wise what we're talking about. So that's been really helpful, I think, for people that if they ever had a question about when we're going to go live, they know. There should be no questions because I'm telling them with these graphics. So I definitely recommend that, and I use Canva to create all those things. Even Canva has like Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter icons already loaded in there, so you don't have to go fishing around for logos. They have a lot of logos already built into the platform, which is really, really nice. So I guess it's kind of, I've taken you through my process of how I get an episode of Supergirl Radio out to the world. So if you want to catch up with me, you can find me on supergirlradio.com, social media Supergirl Radio. You can email us at supergirlradio@gmail.com. Basically, you can just Supergirl Radio, and that's where you can find us. So are there any questions or anything you wanted to mention? Like if you are going to recommend a new podcaster or something, what would you advise people?
I mean, honestly, I think you covered most of it. We use a lot of the same equipment, a lot of the same programs. I mean, I'm right there with you on pretty much all of it. Canva, I haven't used for the show, but I use it for other things. It is a great program.
Yeah, Canva I really like because it does sort of dumb it down for me a little bit, and I use it for work, I use it for the podcast, I use it for personal things, and it's just been so easy to use, and I just really, really love it, and I can't say much more about it in terms of like praising it. I think I would be here for days talking about Canva. There may be some other websites and platforms out there that do similar things, but I really, really like Canva. It makes someone like me, who is not a graphic designer, look kind of like I know what I'm doing, which I don't really. But with Photoshop, you have to go in there and you have to create the lines yourself, and you have to, do all of you have to create the shapes yourself and do all that stuff yourself. But in Canva, they already have shapes created, they have frames that you can utilize, they have different kinds of lines already built into there, so you can customize, and pick and choose which lines you want to use, and so it takes away all the more work out of Photoshop that you would have. Like I could create these things in Photoshop, but it would just take me so much longer to do. So Canva just makes it so much quicker and easier for me personally. And I guess we have a few more minutes. And I do have a giveaway item. I have a friend of mine named Bill Meeks who did a lot of podcasting. He did Legends of Gotham. He did his Once Upon a Time podcast called Greetings from Storybrooke. And he did a lot of audio podcasts as well as video live streaming. I've learned a lot from him. I've stolen some things from him. He's one of my good friends, so I don't think he minds if I borrowed some of the things or some of the ways that they handle their shows. I learned a lot about building community from Bill, and so he actually he stopped doing some podcasting. I think he's actually about to start a new one. But he sort of winded down his podcasting experience, and he decided he would write a book about it so that all that information that was in his head wouldn't just go away. So he actually wrote a book called Fan Podcasting, The Complete Guide, and I'm actually in it a few times because he asked me for feedback, and so he used some of my feedback as quotes in the book. So I'm not promoting it just because I'm in it, but because it's a really well thought out book on podcasting. So I don't know, I think some of the things that he talks about will probably be relevant to your show, but he also talks a lot about if you're fan podcasting about a show or movie reviews. He has some really great thoughts about how to critique something. So that might be something if you're looking at stories. The way he goes about looking at critiquing a story is actually, I think, very productive, because some people can just say, I hate this, or it's not what I want, or that kind of thing. But that's not really a productive way to look at a story. Being able to analyze it to where it's something that's beneficial to the listener, I think is something that he does really well in the book. So I do have a promo code, so you can get a free copy if you would like one. And so that I would recommend it even if I wasn't in it. So it's a great book. But I guess we have a few more minutes left. Anything else? What are some of your favorite podcasts that you like to listen to?
Well, I definitely want to give a shout out to Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, where I am an enthusiastic amateur. She is an expert in Greek mythology. She is a trained classicist. She's learning Greek right now. Her show is amazing. It is much bigger than mine, but we are Twitter friends. She's great. Absolutely recommend her show. Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast is one of my all-time favorite history shows. It's coming up on the end now, but it's an incredibly well-researched show about different revolutions through history, which is one of the shows that is not my genre, but I listen to for. He's such a professional that I try to use the way he does things as sort of a model for the better way to approach some of the stories. I think he's a great podcast. And then, of course, the Film Reroll is one of my favorite comedy shows. They do movies as RPGs, and it's so much fun.
That is really cool. Yeah, I think one of the things that I do as a podcaster is I listen to other podcasts to see what they do well and see how I can maybe adapt that. So the best thing to do as a podcaster is listen to other podcasts. So that's really, really cool. Well, thank you for being with me and having a conversation about this. I think I've learned a little bit from you, so thank you for sharing. And I'll maybe also give you my business card so we can keep in touch. And I'll also give you a promo code for the book if you're interested.
Sure, yeah, this was great. This was very informative. Thank you.
Awesome.